In the last video that I uploaded, a couple of people asked about the decks on the Aeronef models. Because they're quite fine, it can be quite a challenge to see how to do them. You can see it's got that ribbing on the deck. Of course, I've painted these with a matte flat colour, and you could just leave them like that for a start. I mean, it does still look reasonable from a distance, although it's not sort of highlighting those ribs on there at all for the wooden planks. Obviously, naturally, of a ship of this sort of scale, you shouldn't see the planks anyway. It would be too far away to see the planks, but they look nice when they're washed and dry brushed up a bit. It adds to the detail. So it looks nice. It's worth doing it, I think, to add that extra level of detail. So I do that using a base of Israeli Sand Grey, which is a paint from Life Colour. And the Israeli colour is like a very sandy style. You can see here it matches the deck that I've done on there. These are both from the British fleets, this one in the middle and one here, and you can see the size of them here now. You can see my finger in the frame. This is a Brazilian model, and again they're all work in progress, so I haven't finished any of the flags and things on there at all. But you can see the deck on this one has been washed, so that would have had the same Israeli Sand Grey, this Life Colour paint, fantastic paint, and all I've done is added on the wash. Now the wash is an ink wash. I used to use one called Griffin Sepia. In fact, I have some of that left over, but it's come to the end of its line now. They don't do these at Games Workshop. I've tried the newer Games Workshop shades, and I've sort of come down to this one in the end being the nearest to a sort of tone I'm looking for, which is from Army Painter, and it also comes in a dropper bottle, so that's very handy. And all that's happened on this one on the end here is that that's been washed on there. I probably did a very light dry brush, I can see around the edge here, but I haven't actually dry brushed the deck at all. I've just washed the ink on and gone from there, and that looks fine. Again, you could pretty much be happy with that, I think, to have a game with. Okay, so I shall show you how I wash it on, which is very simple. I'll take the lid off, and then I just squirt it all over. No, I drop it first of all into one of these paint trays, of which I've handy tip for you here. I put silver foil over my paint tray, and that means you can just keep tearing the foil off and put a new sheet over. So you can see it's quite thick actually. Don't want to pour it over the figures, but it's kind of a bit like a thick gravy. So what I'll need to do is thin that down. I'm using quite a large brush. In fact, this is a Citadel, just called a standard brush. I guess that's about size 1 or 2, and this allows me to pick up quite a nice lot of paint when I put it on there, essentially. And I thought I'd demonstrate on this one because it had quite a large deck, and also on the smaller ones you can see how I sort of go up around the edge. Sometimes mistakes do happen when you're doing the washing. You might sort of splash up on some of the superstructure somewhere, or the along the edge as well. There's another thing I do is I might go down onto the black, and it will show, so it's worth thinking that it's something not to be too worried about while you're doing the washing, and that you could go on something else, but you could tidy it up afterwards because it should be quite thin. So then I'm just going to apply some water in there. I use this spray gun for water. I can sort of dribble out the water on there. You can see I'm just putting in some, just trying to get it thinner really, and stirring it around. You can see how it's thinning down a bit. It's certainly not as gravy-like as it was before, so there I have a little bit of a thinner amount. So I quite heavily load the brush because I want to try and get as much done as possible in one sort of stroke. So this is going to be a bit tricky with the camera, but here we go. So there you go. It's quite thin. I've left a hair there, that's no good. Bit of dust, just wipe that off. And as you can see as it's going on, I'm trying to not have any areas that might pool. because you get a kind of tide mark on there is the best way to describe it. Obviously this one's a bit easier because it's one large panel. And just going up along the edge there. So you can hardly see that, can you? So I'll just bring that up so you can see a bit better how the ink is going into the lines and grooves. So I'll just flip it round so I can do the other side. Again, I've quite heavily loaded brush because it's got a large space to do there. You can probably see that side a bit better. Just being careful to go up into the edges there. I don't really want to go high up on the side walls. So just for my convenience, I'm flipping it around. I may actually move the light back a little bit just to see if that... No, that's not helping. Don't want it too bright. So here we go. I'll just finish off with a last drop or two. And along the back, just into those corners as well. Oh, another bit of dust. When you're working on things this size, dust does get annoying. Right, so there we have it. Pretty quick really. It's still drying, so you can see it's got a shine on it at the moment. But give it about 5 minutes and then it'll be dry. If you wanted it any darker, you could go again on some of those areas once it's properly dried though. Otherwise, if I was to go back on now, although it still looks wet, what I'll find is I'll start pulling off the paint as it's drying. So best to be patient with it and let it completely 100% dry before adding any extra coats or doing anything else on there. So popping that one out of the way, try not to have a disaster with it going on the floor. I shall show you this other one which is a little bit more detail. You could go down to a smaller brush. I'm quite comfortable with quite large brushes. And again, I'm just going along as quickly as I can. You can see I thinned it down a lot again. Don't want it to be really dark. It doesn't matter that you end up with a couple of areas that might look darker than others, because if you dry brush afterwards, it'll cover up those errors. So you can see again now there's a slight contrast between the ribs on there, and you're not after that completely kind of candy apple style result anyway. So yeah, if you did find that the ink was not strong enough, you could again, like I was saying before, go back with another coat. Tricky bits to get into, there's lots of them on these R&F, is things like down the side there, which I find the longer pointed brush helps with really, because you can get straight into those nooks and crannies. The funnel on here hasn't been finished yet, it's just had 1/2 of a coat, and also I haven't done any of the metalwork on the actual turrets, which I will finish off after I've done the decking. So there you go. So you can see if I bring up the other model as well, which is now dry, well, it's drying, and the front there, it's added some lines into that, and some people might be happy with that. So there you go. Oh, there is a darker patch on this one here, down the front. In fact, I could have done that the same decking colour, but I went for a darker colour. In fact, I used a colour called Mahogany Stain, although it's lost its label there. It's a life colour colour again, which has been designed actually for doing sort of guns or decks and things with that mahogany stain colour. It's a nice brown, In fact, I could go in there with some wash as well. So, oh, and at the back there's some of those as well, which you can't see around there, but okay, so that's me clattering the brush, and that's the sort of first stage really. You get that washed into the nooks and crannies. It does look a bit uneven. You might want to go back with a second coat if you're really fussy, but I think it looks reasonable. Here's one I did earlier, where you can see I actually did go on with a few more bits of coat. I went on a couple of times actually across that to really highlight some of these areas along the back. So this is actually an aircraft carrier, and it's from the well, it's from the range for the Turkish fleets actually. It's a bit precarious on there. I might put it on a little base to try and keep it in line. That's not going to help it that much, but there you go. So, and you can see on here basically I've just washed on, and I haven't dry brushed this one yet actually. It's had its various windows and things done on the side there. I've actually painted this one up as a Brazilian one as well, so that's why I've gone for the green and yellow striping on the back. So there you go. And so the first coat of a dry brush is what I would do on there, is I would use the sort of dry brushing flat brush which I use. In fact, this is a life colour brush, 568/1, and you can see it's a flat end to it. And all I would do with that is get a little bit of tissue, and the original colour I used, the Israeli sand grey, which I'm going to get some and blob out. So simply draw that across until it's dry. Obviously everybody knows how to dry brush these days, until you've got very little paint on there. In fact, what I'll do is I'll show that on one of these ones I just did. So if I can see, it's now drying off on the front of this one. So all I would do is just drag that over. It's actually so subtle it's quite hard to see it, but what it will be doing is highlighting up the raised areas and just making it a little bit more even though there's a wash on there. This looks particularly good along the edges. It looks like sort of wear and tear, and highlights it slightly if you go along the edge. So that might take 5 minutes really to go all the way over. Difficult to see the difference again, isn't it really? But there you go, it is slightly highlighting the end. So there you go, quick overview of doing some deck work. What I might do with this one is do another wash just to darken it before I dry brush again, but it has already brought up quite a nice texture in there. Okay, thanks for listening in.